clang of steel echoed through the streets of Constantinople. The city, long a symbol of Christian might, was about to fall. The massive Ottoman cannons, firing relentlessly, sent tremors through the walls of the ancient city. In the midst of the smoke and chaos, Mehmed II, the young Sultan of the Ottomans, stood at the forefront of his forces, his gaze fixed on the city he had dreamed of conquering since his youth. The gates of Constantinople were not merely barriers, they were symbols of an empire that had withstood the test of time. For nearly 1,000 years, this city had been the epicenter of Christianity, a bastion of culture, knowledge, and power. Now it stood on the precipice of destruction, the end of an era and the dawn of another. As Mehmed's cannonballs tore through the city's defenses, the walls that had held firm for centuries began to crumble. The screams of the defenders filled the air, but they were drowned out by the resounding thud of the mighty Ottoman artillery. The clash of two worlds was upon them: the Byzantine Empire, steeped in ancient traditions, and the Ottoman Empire, a rising force with its eyes set on the future. This moment, in the year 1453, would mark a turning point in world history. The fall of Constantinople would reshape the very map of Europe and Asia, altering the course of empires, religions, and cultures forever. It was not just the city that was falling, it was an entire world. Hey there, I'm glad you're here. In today's video, I will take you through the incredible timeline of the Ottoman Empire, from its humble beginnings under Osman I to its rise as a global superpower, the monumental conquest of Constantinople, and the peak of its power under Suleiman the Magnificent. We'll also explore the challenges and eventual decline of this once mighty empire, and its legacy that still echoes today. I'm excited to share this journey with you. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing how far and wide this story reaches. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. If you're not subscribed yet, kindly hit that button. Your support means the world to us. Let's get started. In the heart of the Mediterranean world, where continents met and civilizations collided, lay a land that would soon become the stage for one of the most remarkable stories in history. The land was Anatolia, a rugged peninsula with its towering mountains, fertile plains, and strategic access to 3 seas: the Mediterranean, the Aegean, and the Black Sea. But this wasn't just a geographical advantage, it was the geographical advantage. It was here that empires could either rise or fall, and entire civilizations could be swept away by the tides of change. Anatolia had always been a land coveted by powers both east and west. To the south lay Egypt and the distant riches of Africa, while to the north, the Byzantine Empire clung to its fading glory. To the east were the Persian empires, ever watchful, while to the west lay the Greek and Roman influence. This confluence of cultures made Anatolia a melting pot, not just of peoples, but of ideas, each conquering empire adding its own layer of history and legacy. For centuries, Anatolia had witnessed the ebb and flow of civilizations, from the Hittites to the Phrygians, from the Greek city-states to the Romans, and later, the Byzantines. This land was a crossroads of history, a place where mighty empires rose, flourished, and eventually crumbled. The Mediterranean Sea, with its endless trade routes, brought wealth, ideas, and invasions alike. The Bosphorus Strait, that narrow but crucial waterway, held the key to control of the region, connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean and serving as the dividing line between Europe and Asia. Whoever held the Bosphorus held the gates to both continents. But Anatolia's significance wasn't just defined by its geopolitical location. It was the socio-cultural melting pot that would shape the rise of the Ottoman Empire. By the time the Seljuks entered the picture in the 11th century, Anatolia had been a fragmented battleground for centuries, its inhabitants used to shifting allegiances, invasions, and betrayals. When the Seljuks came in 1071, after their victory at Manzikert, they created a new power dynamic that would be felt for centuries. It was in this context of decline and reorganization that the Ottoman Empire found fertile ground. The Byzantine Empire, once a titan of the Mediterranean, was now in its death throes, crippled by internal strife and external pressures. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century had shattered the stability of Anatolia, leaving a power vacuum that would change the course of history. The Mongol invasions, led by Genghis Khan's descendants, ravaged the region, causing mass displacement and destruction. The Seljuk Sultanate, once the dominant force in Anatolia, was broken, and the Beyliks, small Turkish principalities, emerged to fill the void. Among these fledgling beyliks was one led by Osman, whose name would become synonymous with empire building, Osman I. This was the world into which Osman was born, an environment of instability, but one filled with opportunity for those who could seize it. The Mongols had paved the way for the rise of a new empire, and Osman would be the one to take advantage of it. As he looked out over the vast Anatolian plains, Osman I saw not only a land of uncertainty, but also a land of immense potential. His people, the Turkish tribes, had lived in the shadow of larger empires for centuries. Now, with the Seljuk Sultanate crumbling and the Byzantine Empire weakening by the day, it was the perfect moment for his people to rise. Osman wasn't merely seeking land or riches. He was seeking something far greater, the chance to forge an empire that would last for centuries. But what made Anatolia's geography so compelling to him? It was its accessibility. Anatolia was the bridge between the East and West, with the Bosphorus Strait allowing for direct access to both Europe and Asia. It was a land that could unite two worlds, forging alliances, but also inviting conflicts. Anatolia's strategic position made it a gateway for trade, but also a target for invaders, with great empires constantly vying for control. It was in this volatile yet promising environment that the seeds of the Ottoman Empire would be sown. The road was paved for change. With the fall of the Byzantine Empire, the Ottomans would not only rise, they would become the dominant force in a region that had seen countless empires come and go. But their rise would not be without struggle. Osman's vision would be tested by countless battles, by rival states, by the complexities of managing a diverse, multicultural empire. In the 13th century, when the Mongols swept through, many saw the devastation as a tragic end. But for Osman I, it was the beginning of something entirely new. The shifting borders, the weakened empires, the restless peoples. These were the ingredients that would shape the foundation of the Ottoman state. With the Mongol pressure causing the collapse of old structures, Osman would seize the opportunity to unite the Turkish tribes and forge an empire that would transcend Anatolia's borders, reaching into Europe, Asia, and even Africa. In the late 12th and 13th centuries, the Byzantine Empire was no longer the unchallenged beacon of the East. Once an empire that spanned from the edges of Italy to the mountains of Armenia, it had now become a shadow of its former self. The glory days of the Byzantine Empire were fading fast, burdened by internal strife, an overburdened economy, and external pressures. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1204, was a cruel turning point. Instead of targeting the enemies of Christianity, The Crusaders, driven by greed, turned against the very heart of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, the jewel of the empire, was sacked, its treasures looted, its citizens massacred. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a psychological blow, an assault on the very soul of the Byzantine world. The empire limped on for another half-century, but it was never the same. The internal decay was apparent. Civil wars erupted between rival factions, with the throne changing hands in bloody succession. The once unified Christian faith that held the empire together began to fray, as competing factions within Constantinople fought for power. This constant turmoil, combined with economic decline, made the Byzantines vulnerable to the world beyond their walls. With their resources depleted, their military weakened, and their cities under siege, the Byzantines were unable to defend against the next great threat, the Mongols. In the 13th century, the Mongols, under the leadership of Genghis Khan, swept across Asia with a ferocity never before seen in history. The Mongol invasion of Anatolia in 1243 was devastating for the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. In the Battle of Kursa Dağ, the Seljuks, once the dominant Turkish power in Anatolia, were decisively defeated by the Mongols. Their defeat shattered the unity of Anatolia and opened the door for even greater instability. The Mongol invasion didn't just destroy armies, it obliterated economies and fractured civilizations, creating a power vacuum that would have lasting repercussions. The Mongol presence, while devastating for the Seljuks, also created new opportunities. The once conquered territories were now in a state of disarray, where local leaders, military commanders, and even merchants, disillusioned with their former rulers, began to assert control over their own fates. In the wake of the Mongol invasions, Anatolia was left with a fragmented collection of smaller Turkish principalities, or beyliks, each jockeying for power. The Seljuk Sultanate had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, its capital in Konya, a symbol of the empire's collapse. For the Byzantines, the Mongol invasions were a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they weakened the Seljuk threat, but on the other, they left the Byzantine Empire even more vulnerable. With Anatolia now in a state of flux, the Byzantine capital, Constantinople, stood exposed, its once formidable walls no longer sufficient to hold back the rising tide of Turkic forces. But the Byzantines were not yet entirely defeated. They remained entrenched in the city, and their resilience had not been broken entirely. However, their lack of unity, combined with their failure to adapt to the new reality of a rapidly changing world, meant that they could do little to prevent the rise of new powers. Osman I, leader of a small Turkish tribe from the Beylik of Söğüt, saw the opportunity for what it was: a fractured world ripe for unification under a new banner. His tribe, one of many vying for control in a fractured Anatolia, was small compared to the once mighty Seljuk Sultanate or the Byzantine Empire. But Osman was not daunted. Anatolia, divided by wars and rivalries, was a land in need of leadership, unity, and vision. With his tribe's military prowess, strategic alliances, and an acute awareness of the power vacuum left by the Byzantines and the Seljuks, Osman set out to carve his own empire. And what he built, starting from the small fortress town of Söğüt, would eventually evolve into the Ottoman Empire, an empire that would, in time, stretch across 3 continents, lasting for over 6 centuries. The fragmentation of the Byzantine Empire, coupled with the collapse of the Seljuks and the sweeping chaos of the Mongol invasions, provided the perfect storm for Osman's rise. The stage was set. As the Byzantines retreated behind their city walls and the Seljuks were scattered to the winds, Osman and his successors would unite the Turkish tribes of Anatolia. setting in motion the creation of one of the most powerful empires the world would ever know. The power vacuum left by the collapse of the Byzantines and the Seljuks didn't just create an opportunity for new powers to rise. It created the Ottoman Empire, an empire destined to reshape the history of the world for centuries to come. The winds of change were sweeping across Anatolia in the late 13th century. The Seljuk Sultanate, once the dominant power in the region, had crumbled under the pressure of both external forces and internal discord. The Byzantine Empire, weakened by centuries of mismanagement and political decay, clung desperately to its remaining territories. Its heart, Constantinople, now threatened by new enemies. Amidst this turbulence, the ancient Turkish tribes, once scattered across the Anatolian steppes, found themselves presented with an opportunity that would change history. Osman, born in 1258, was the son of Ertuğrul, the leader of the Kai tribe, a small but influential group of Turkish nomads. From an early age, Osman was surrounded by the harsh realities of tribal life: constant warfare, the need for cunning alliances, and the challenge of surviving in a world where empires rose and fell. The Turkic people in Anatolia were largely divided into scattered beyliks, small competing states, each fighting for control of land, wealth, and influence. Yet, Osman was different. From the beginning, he exhibited an uncanny ability to unite disparate tribes and warriors under one banner. It was not just his bloodline or his status as the son of Ertuğrul that set him apart, but his charisma, his sense of purpose, and his natural leadership skills. Even as a young man, he was able to inspire loyalty in those around him. But what motivated him to rise above his peers, to lead and conquer where others faltered? The answer lies not just in his military ability, but in his vision for the future. Osman did not see himself as a mere tribal leader. He saw himself as someone chosen by fate, someone destined to unite the disparate Turkish tribes and create an empire. The Ghazi warriors, the frontier fighters whose zeal for Islam was as strong as their desire for land and wealth, gravitated toward him. These men, driven by a sense of divine duty, found in Osman a leader who could offer them more than simple survival. He could offer them glory. The Ghazi warriors, emboldened by the prospect of spreading Islam and gaining land, formed the backbone of Osman's growing power. These warriors, hardened by battle and driven by both faith and ambition, saw in Osman a commander who shared their spiritual and material goals. Osman's leadership was rooted in this sense of common purpose, a blend of religious zeal and practical strategy. But it was not just on the battlefield that Osman excelled. His ability to inspire loyalty and foster unity among his people was what truly set him apart. In a world of fragmented tribal politics, where leaders rose and fell with alarming speed, Osman's ability to unite various factions, both Turkish and non-Turkish, was extraordinary. He was a diplomat as much as a warrior, knowing when to negotiate and when to fight. The most famous story that encapsulates Osman's rise is his dream, which would later become the cornerstone of his empire building. In this vision, he saw a tree growing from his loins, its branches spreading across the world. The tree was symbolic, not just of physical expansion, but of the empire he was destined to build, a legacy that would reach far beyond his life. The vision was not just a mystical experience, it was a divine affirmation of his leadership and ambition. To Osman and his followers, it was clear he was chosen by a higher power to bring order to the chaos of Anatolia. The dream fueled Osman's ambition, but it also served as a unifying force for his followers. His warriors, the Ghazi, were eager to rally behind this vision, to stake their claim in the world of empires. Osman's military campaigns in the early 1290s reflected this. His success was not just due to sheer military might, but to the unwavering belief in his divine mission. The dream of the tree was not just a private symbol, it became a rallying cry for all those who followed him, a reminder that they were part of something much greater than themselves. However, Osman's rise was not without rivals. The Byzantine Empire, still holding its capital of Constantinople, saw Osman as a threat. Though weakened, the Byzantines still held strategic land in Anatolia and had a history of pushing back against Turkish invaders. Meanwhile, other Turkish chieftains were wary of Osman's growing influence. The Seljuk Sultanate, though broken, still had loyalists and military commanders who sought to assert their own power over Anatolia. Osman's rise was never guaranteed, and it was through a combination of military skill, alliances, and strategic diplomacy that he managed to overcome these obstacles. His first major victory came in 1299, when he formally declared independence from the Seljuk Sultanate. This was not just a political move, it was the birth of the Ottoman Empire. The declaration was a symbolic moment, marking the beginning of a new era in Anatolia. Osman, with his followers, had carved out a small but powerful realm in a region that was in complete disarray. His empire would continue to grow through both military conquests and the gradual absorption of neighboring tribes and territories. In the decades that followed, Osman's descendants would expand the empire further, eventually conquering the Byzantine Empire and establishing one of the most enduring empires in history. But it all began with the vision of a nomadic leader who rose from humble beginnings. With nothing but his charisma, his vision, and his faith in his dream of a world-spanning empire. The tree that grew from his loins would one day cover the world, and the empire he founded would stretch from the Balkans to the Middle East and beyond. By 1299, the world of Anatolia had already been shaped by centuries of invasions, migrations, and shifts in power. The Seljuk Sultanate, once the dominant Turkish power in the region, had been decimated by the Mongols, leaving Anatolia a fractured land of small Turkish beyliks. The Byzantine Empire, though still holding its capital of Constantinople, was a shadow of its former self, its influence on the Anatolian peninsula waning by the day. In this chaos, a young leader emerged, Osman I, the son of Ertuğrul, a warrior chieftain who had established his small Turkish tribe in the borders of Bithynia, near the Byzantine territories. Osman's rise was anything but inevitable, despite the absence of any major empire to challenge him directly in Anatolia. Osman was forced to face significant internal challenges that would define his journey. The Turkish beyliks, though fractured, were still powerful. Some were loyal to the Seljuks, while others were staunchly independent. Among these leaders, Osman was just another nomadic chieftain, yet what set him apart was his visionary leadership and his ability to inspire loyalty in a fractured world. From the very beginning, Osman understood that military prowess alone would not ensure his success. Anatolia's fragmented tribes were often at odds, divided by tribalism, regionalism, and their long-standing hostilities. Osman, however, was a master of both diplomacy and warfare. He knew that to rise above his peers, he would have to unite the tribes under a common cause. A cause rooted not just in the desire for land or wealth, but in something far more profound. Osman's vision was a unification of the Turkish people, and an expansion not just of territory, but of an empire built on faith, strength, and justice. Osman's ability to unite these tribes came not only from his charisma, but from his deep connection to the Ghazi warriors, the frontier fighters who combined military ambition with religious zeal. These warriors, driven by the promise of both spiritual reward and material gain, saw in Osman a leader who could fulfill their desire for conquest while also championing their faith. Osman himself was not only a warrior, but a visionary. He understood that his people craved more than mere survival. They craved glory and meaning. This was the key to his rise, his ability to channel the zeal of the Ghazi warriors into loyalty and action. In 1299, Osman had a vision that would forever shape the destiny of his people. He dreamed of a tree growing from his loins, its branches spreading far and wide, covering the world in its shade. This vision, mystical in nature, was not just a personal dream. It was a divine affirmation of his right to rule. The tree, with its branches stretching across the earth, symbolized the empire he was destined to build, a unified Turkish state that would extend far beyond the borders of Anatolia. This mystical experience resonated deeply with Osman's followers. To them, Osman was no mere tribal leader. He was a chosen leader, one who had been anointed by a higher power to lead them towards something greater than individual conquest, the foundation of an empire. The dream served not only as a spiritual guide, but as a political tool that bolstered Osman's legitimacy in the eyes of his warriors. They didn't just follow him because of his military skill. They followed him because they believed that he was destined for greatness. This connection between faith and ambition would become the hallmark of the Ottoman state. The small town of Söğüt, a modest settlement on the frontier of the Seljuk Sultanate and the Byzantine-controlled territories, became the birthplace of an empire. It was here, amidst the hills and open fields, that Osman would secure his first significant victory. The Byzantine forces, unable to adapt to Osman's hit-and-run tactics and his ability to exploit local knowledge, were caught off guard. Osman's forces, though numerically inferior, were more mobile and better suited to the rough terrain of Anatolia. The sound of hooves pounding the earth, the clash of swords, and the war cries of Osman's warriors reverberated through the air as they triumphed over their Byzantine enemies. But the victory at Söğüt was not merely military, it was a symbolic victory, a sign that Osman could not only defend his land, but also expand it. The victory set the stage for future expansion, as Osman's growing influence began to attract more followers from other Turkish tribes and Christian communities disillusioned with Byzantine rule. It marked the first step in the creation of the Ottoman state. In 1299, after several years of skirmishes, alliances, and territorial gains, Osman made a bold decision. He declared his independence from the weakening Seljuk Sultanate, a move that would forever change the course of history. By proclaiming independence, Osman signaled the birth of a new power in Anatolia, one that would soon rival both the Byzantine and Seljuk empires. His decision to break from the Seljuks not only gave him the autonomy he needed to expand, but it also marked the official founding of the Ottoman Empire. The declaration in 1299 was more than a political maneuver. It was the official birth date of an empire that would, over the next few centuries, dominate much of the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. Osman's vision, which had been seeded in his dream of the tree, was now taking shape in the form of a unified state that would grow through military conquest, strategic marriages, and religious tolerance. The Ottoman Empire, born in the rugged terrain of Anatolia, would eventually stretch from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of North Africa. One of Osman's most remarkable achievements was his ability to foster religious tolerance within his rapidly expanding state. While many empires of the time sought to conquer and convert, Osman understood that coexistence was key to maintaining the stability of his newly formed realm. His policies toward the Christian communities in Anatolia were remarkably inclusive. Christians, particularly those who lived within Byzantine-held territories, found that they were not persecuted but allowed to continue practicing their faith. This was in stark contrast to the harsh religious policies of other powers in the region, where conversion or death was often the only option. Osman's ability to tolerate diverse religious practices not only helped solidify his rule, but also laid the foundation for the Ottoman millet system, which would become a defining characteristic of the empire for centuries to come. By allowing Christians and Jews to maintain a level of autonomy in their religious and civil matters, Osman created a stable, multi-religious society, a concept that would be emulated by future Ottoman rulers. When Osman I, the visionary father of the Ottoman Empire, passed away in 1326, the stage was set for a new chapter. His son, Orhan I, was destined to follow in his footsteps, but his path would not be without challenges. Orhan inherited a kingdom still young, raw and vulnerable, yet one on the precipice of greatness. The Ottoman Beylik was no longer just a small tribe fighting for survival. It was now an empire in the making, and Orhan was determined to build on the foundations Osman laid, shaping the Ottoman state into a force that would endure for centuries. Under Osman's leadership, the Ottomans had won significant victories, but the true test for Orhan was to transform those early conquests into a unified, centralized empire, which required both military strength and visionary governance. He would be the one to expand the borders, solidify Ottoman rule in Anatolia, and lay down the cultural, military, and administrative foundations for a new empire, one that would eventually control much of southeastern Europe, Asia Minor, and the Middle East. Orhan's early reign was defined by his aggressive military campaigns and his careful political maneuvering. The Byzantine Empire, though in decline, still controlled important cities in Anatolia and the Balkans, and Orhan recognized that eliminating Byzantine influence was critical for securing his empire's future. By the time he succeeded his father, Bursa was still a key Byzantine stronghold in the region, but Orhan knew its strategic value. Bursa was not just a military prize. It was a cultural and economic hub, positioned at the crossroads between the Balkans and Anatolia. The capture of Bursa in 1326 marked a pivotal moment for the Ottomans. It was a victory that symbolized not just military might, but also Orhan's long-term vision. It was here that the Ottomans would transition from nomadic raiders to masters of a sprawling urban empire. Bursa's fortifications, still bearing the scars of Byzantine rule, stood as a testament to the ancient city's resilience. But once the Ottomans took it, it quickly became the first capital of the empire, a thriving city that would evolve under Orhan's leadership, blending Byzantine heritage with the rising Ottoman identity. Orhan understood that simply conquering land wasn't enough. To secure his empire, he needed to create a stable administration that would manage both urban and rural communities, unite diverse peoples, and defend against future threats. Orhan set about rebuilding Bursa's infrastructure, fostering trade, and encouraging cultural exchange among Muslims, Christians, and Jews. This shift from nomadic tribal leadership to urban governance was critical for the long-term stability of the Ottomans. Bursa's mosques, markets, and schools would become the heart of Ottoman culture, where the empire's administrative and military structures began to take shape. One of Orhan's most enduring legacies was the creation of the Janissary Corps, an elite force that would become the backbone of the Ottoman military for centuries to come. Unlike the tribal warriors who fought for Orhan's father, Osman, Orhan understood that to sustain an empire, he needed a professional army. This wasn't just about raw strength on the battlefield. It was about discipline, loyalty, and specialized training that would set the Ottomans apart from other empires. Orhan's creation of the Janissaries was revolutionary. Through the Devshirme system, Christian boys from the Balkans were recruited, converted to Islam, and trained as soldiers. But they were more than just warriors. They were loyal to the Sultan, an elite fighting force that was directly tied to the Ottoman state, rather than to individual tribes or feudal lords. By building this force, Orhan effectively consolidated central power, ensuring that the military would no longer be at the mercy of regional leaders or tribal allegiances. These soldiers, fiercely loyal to the Ottoman cause, would become known for their discipline and innovative tactics, helping to propel the Ottomans into an era of military dominance. The formation of the Janissaries was not only a military revolution, it was a political one, laying the groundwork for the Ottoman system that would define the empire for centuries. The Janissaries were integral in future Ottoman military campaigns, including the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, where they played a key role in the conquest of the Byzantine capital. Despite his successes, Orhan faced considerable internal challenges. The empire was still young, and rival Turkish beyliks and Byzantine remnants in Anatolia did not accept Orhan's rise without resistance. These rival powers often resisted Ottoman control and sometimes sought to form alliances with each other against Orhan's forces. But Orhan's military genius and ability to form strategic alliances helped him navigate these challenges. He integrated conquered regions into the growing Ottoman state, while also ensuring loyalty through both diplomacy and force. Family dynamics also presented a challenge. Orhan's sons and close advisors sometimes competed for influence in the early years of his reign, creating a political atmosphere of intrigue. These family rivalries and power struggles were common in the early years of empires, and Orhan had to balance military victories with internal political maneuvering to ensure his leadership remained unchallenged. One of Orhan's most significant achievements was his policy of religious tolerance. While many empires of the time sought to forcibly convert populations or exterminate minorities, Orhan recognized the value of coexisting peacefully with the diverse peoples of his empire. Christians in Bursa and the surrounding regions were allowed to practice their religion without fear of persecution, and churches and synagogues were preserved alongside the mosques. This policy helped stabilize the Ottoman Empire in its early years, preventing the religious tensions that plagued other empires from taking root. Orhan's policies towards Christians and his multicultural approach to governance fostered loyalty among both his Muslim and Christian subjects, ensuring that the newly formed empire could grow without internal strife. The Ottoman approach to governance was unique in its emphasis on tolerance, allowing the empire to remain united even as it expanded into new territories. Orhan I's reign was a defining moment in Ottoman history. Through his military victories, including the conquest of Bursa and the formation of the Janissary Corps, he transformed the Ottoman state from a small nomadic beylik into a centralized empire with a strong urban base and a professional army. His policies of religious tolerance and strategic governance helped consolidate the Ottoman Empire's power, setting the stage for future expansion into Europe and Asia. As the Ottoman Empire grew, Orhan's legacy lived on, not just in the cities he built, the armies he created, but in the inclusive nature of the state he established, one that would last for centuries and shape the course of history in the Middle East, Europe, and North Africa. If you've made it this far and found this story of Orhan's rise and the Ottoman Empire's foundations captivating, don't just sit there, hit that subscribe button. If you still haven't, you're missing out on more incredible stories that could change the way you see history. Don't wait until it's too late. Subscribe now, or risk missing out on the empire-building journeys we've got coming up next. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453 is perhaps the most pivotal event in the history of the Ottoman Empire and one of the most dramatic moments in world history. It was the day when the Byzantine Empire, which had once been the heart of the Roman world, finally fell, and the Ottoman Empire rose to its apex. At the center of this momentous event was a man whose vision, determination, and sheer willpower changed the world. Mehmed II, the future conqueror. Born in 1432 to Sultan Murad II, Mehmed's early life was steeped in the blood of war and politics. As the fourth son of a powerful sultan, Mehmed was not initially set to inherit the throne. However, fate had other plans. From an early age, Mehmed showed a remarkable intellect, military aptitude, and ambition. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he understood that the path to power was not only through strength but through knowledge, strategy, and the unyielding pursuit of a singular goal. Mehmed's early education was rigorous. History, literature, and military strategy were his focus, as his father ensured he was well prepared for the challenges of leadership. His childhood was marked by deep lessons in statecraft and martial prowess. His tutor, Musa of the Janissaries, instilled in him the value of innovation on the battlefield, lessons that would serve him well in his future conquests. By the time Mehmed ascended to the throne at the age of 19, the Ottoman Empire was already a significant force in the region. However, there was one thing that Mehmed II coveted above all else: the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. For centuries, Constantinople had been a symbol of Christian civilization, a jewel that had withstood numerous sieges. To Mehmed, Constantinople was the key to not only Ottoman expansion, but also to establishing his legacy as the ruler who would unite East and West under one banner. For Mehmed, the city was more than just a strategic target. It was an obsession. He spent years preparing for the siege, studying the city's defenses, understanding its vulnerabilities, and planning his military strategy. The walls of Constantinople were renowned for their strength. Massive stone fortifications that had kept enemies at bay for over 1,000 years. But Mehmed's ambition was not just to attack the city, it was to break it, to show that the Ottoman Empire was now the true power in the region. The siege of Constantinople began in April 1453, and Mehmed's forces, numbering more than 100,000 men, surrounded the city. At the heart of Mehmed's military strategy was a revolutionary weapon: the massive cannons that would forever change the way sieges were fought. These cannons, some as large as 27 feet long, could hurl stones weighing over 600 kilograms, shaking the very walls of Constantinople. The sound of these massive artillery pieces reverberated through the city as they pounded the Byzantine defenses day and night. But the use of these cannons was just one part of Mehmed's military genius. He also deployed siege towers, underground tunnels, and naval blockades to cut off reinforcements from Europe. His naval forces managed to navigate the Golden Horn, a crucial waterway leading to the city, while his engineers worked tirelessly to construct new fortifications and lay siege to the land walls. For Mehmed, every move was calculated, and every setback was met with renewed determination. Inside the walls, the defenders, led by Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire, fought with desperation. The Byzantine forces were outnumbered and outmatched, but they held on, knowing the stakes of their struggle. As the days passed, hope began to fade for the Byzantines. The emotional intensity of the battle was palpable. Every hour that passed, the sound of cannon fire and the clash of metal rang through the air. The Byzantine defenders fought valiantly, but they knew their end was near. On May 29th, 1453, after weeks of relentless bombardment and a final assault, the Ottomans breached the city walls. The Byzantine Empire fell, and the Ottoman Empire claimed Constantinople as its own. Mehmed entered the Hagia Sophia, the magnificent cathedral that had been the heart of the Byzantine Christian world. It is said that Mehmed wept upon seeing the grandeur of the building, recognizing the significance of his victory, not just militarily, but culturally and spiritually. For Mehmed II, the conquest of Constantinople was the culmination of a lifetime of obsession and planning. It was the realization of his dream to unite the East and West under the banner of the Ottoman Empire. The conquest would forever change the landscape of the Mediterranean and beyond. With the fall of Constantinople, Mehmed II set about transforming the city. The ancient Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, symbolizing the transformation of the city from the heart of Christianity to the center of Islamic power. Mehmed renamed the city Istanbul, a name that would come to represent the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire for centuries. Under Mehmed's leadership, Istanbul became a beacon of culture, trade, and intellectualism. The city, once a symbol of the ancient Christian world, now stood as a Muslim metropolis, reflecting the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire. Mehmed ensured that the city's walls were strengthened and its infrastructure was modernized. Istanbul became the gateway between East and West, the center of the Ottoman world. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked not only the end of the Byzantine Empire, but also the dawn of the Ottoman Empire's golden age. Mehmed's victory reshaped the political landscape of Europe, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. The Ottomans became the preeminent power in the region, and Mehmed II became one of the most celebrated and feared rulers in world history. In the years following the conquest, Mehmed turned his attention to expanding his empire. He would go on to conquer Serbia, Bosnia, and even parts of Italy, cementing the Ottoman Empire's dominance over the Balkans. But the fall of Constantinople remained his greatest triumph, an achievement that not only secured his place in history, but also marked the end of an era for Europe. Suleiman IV, the Sultan of the Ottomans, ascended to the throne in 1520 with the weight of a vast empire on his shoulders. Yet the man who would become known as Suleiman the Magnificent was not born a conqueror. He was born into a world of dynastic rivalry, political uncertainty, and an empire that had already reached the height of its power. But what set Suleiman apart was his vision, a vision that transcended military conquest and encompassed governance, justice, and culture. This vision would define not only his reign, but also the fate of the Ottoman Empire itself. Born in 1494, Suleiman was the son of Selim I, who had solidified the Ottoman Empire's dominance over much of the Middle East and the Mamluk Sultanate. From an early age, Suleiman was immersed in the culture of the Ottoman court, where strategic minds, warriors, and scholars gathered to prepare future rulers. His education was designed to cultivate not just a warrior, but a leader, someone capable of understanding the intricacies of governance, diplomacy, and the military. Suleiman was well versed in languages, history, theology, and the art of statecraft. As a young man, Suleiman showed a fierce determination and a remarkable military aptitude, qualities that earned him respect from both his father's court and the Ottoman military. He first proved his worth in battle as a commander when he led Ottoman forces against the Safavids in Persia, capturing territory and enhancing the empire's eastern frontier. But Suleiman's vision was always far grander. He was not simply looking to expand, he was looking to build something that could endure long after his reign. Suleiman's early military success set the stage for a reign that would be marked by unprecedented expansion, a period in which the Ottoman Empire would reach its greatest territorial extent. His military campaigns spanned Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, but it was in Europe where he left his most lasting mark. The Siege of Vienna in 1529 was the farthest west the Ottoman Empire would ever expand, a pivotal moment in the battle for control over Eastern Europe. The Habsburg Empire, with its fortified capital of Vienna, was the last major European power standing in the way of the Ottoman domination of the continent. In 1529, Suleiman's army, numbering more than 120,000 soldiers, laid siege to the city. The Ottoman artillery, massive cannons designed to breach Vienna's stout defences, fired relentlessly, shaking the city's walls and sending tremors through the heart of Christian Europe. Yet, despite his forces' superior numbers and technological advantage, Suleiman could not break the siege. A harsh winter, combined with resistance from the Habsburg defenders and European reinforcements, forced the Ottomans to retreat. While Vienna remained in Habsburg hands, the siege was a stark reminder of the Ottomans' military prowess and the very real threat they posed to Western Europe. It marked the furthest westward push of the Ottoman Empire, cementing Suleiman's status as a ruler who could bring the Ottomans to the gates of Europe. The Ottoman Empire's military victories continued. Suleiman expanded into Hungary, Iraq, and the Levant, securing vital territories that helped maintain the empire's influence. His conquest of Belgrade in 1521 broke the Habsburgs' grip on Central Europe and established Ottoman dominance over the Balkans. His forces would sweep across Hungary, pushing into the Carpathian Basin and ultimately into Iraq, where he defeated the Safavid Empire in 1534, gaining control of Baghdad and cementing Ottoman authority in the Middle East. While Suleiman's military campaigns are often remembered for their sheer scale and power, his contributions as a lawgiver are perhaps just as significant in shaping the empire's future. Under Suleiman's rule, the Ottoman legal system underwent profound reform. The Canon, or secular legal code, was codified, blending Islamic law, Sharia, with Ottoman secular principles, creating a comprehensive framework that governed not only the Muslim population, but also Christians and Jews. This was a revolutionary moment in Ottoman history, as Suleiman sought to create a legal system that was both just and flexible, catering to the needs of a diverse empire. The legal reforms helped stabilize the empire, ensuring that Suleiman's vast domains were governed in a coherent and systematic way. The Canon codified everything from taxation to property rights, and even the rights of women and non-Muslim communities were integrated into the system. This framework would be used throughout the empire for centuries, and Suleiman's influence on Ottoman jurisprudence became a lasting legacy. Suleiman's dual approach, military might paired with legal reform, created a balanced and stable empire, one where the law was respected, but the military was always ready to expand and protect the empire's interests. His reign saw the Ottoman Empire reach the peak of its power, while also establishing the legal and cultural infrastructure that would hold the empire together for generations. Suleiman the Magnificent was not only a conqueror and a lawgiver, he was also a patron of the arts and architecture. His reign marked a golden age for the Ottoman Empire, a time when the empire flourished in literature, poetry, and the arts. He encouraged the building of stunning architectural structures, including the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, designed by the renowned architect Mimar Sinan. The mosque, an architectural marvel, symbolized Suleiman's vision for the Ottoman Empire, not just as a military power, but as a center of culture, faith, and learning. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman Empire also became a center of intellectual exchange, where philosophy, science, and literature were embraced. This period saw the rise of some of the greatest Ottoman poets and scholars, whose work laid the foundations for a thriving Ottoman cultural identity. Suleiman the Magnificent left a legacy that transcended his military conquests. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire became a dominant power, both militarily and culturally. His reforms in law, military strategy, and culture ensured that the empire remained strong and resilient long after his death in 1566. His campaigns, particularly the Siege of Vienna, established the Ottomans' place in European history, while his legal reforms and patronage of the arts shaped the empire's internal structure. As Suleiman's reign came to a close, the Ottoman Empire had achieved the height of its power. The empire's military reached its zenith, its legal system was solidified, and its cultural achievements set the stage for an empire that would endure for centuries. Suleiman's ambition, vision, and leadership set the tone for the Ottoman Empire's legacy, marking the pinnacle of its influence on the world stage. The death of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1566 marked not only the end of an era for the Ottoman Empire, but also the beginning of its slow, yet inevitable decline. Under Suleiman, the empire had reached its greatest territorial extent, a power that stretched across 3 continents. But with his passing, the Ottoman world would never be the same. The monumental success of his reign was built on military might, legal reforms, and centralized authority, but his successors would lack the same strength, vision, and capability. When Suleiman died, he left behind a vast empire, but one fraught with succession problems. The Ottoman system of succession, where the eldest son usually ascended the throne, was inherently unstable because it often pitted brothers against each other, leading to infighting and court intrigues. The sons of Suleiman were not all equipped to handle the immense responsibility of leading such a powerful empire. Selim II, Suleiman's successor, was a weak ruler, often referred to as Selim the Sot, due to his indulgence in wine and leisurely pleasures. Unlike his father, Selim II lacked the military genius and political fortitude that had allowed the Ottomans to thrive under Suleiman's reign. His reliance on viziers and court factions to manage the empire exposed the weaknesses of the imperial structure. Selim's reign was characterized by political instability, and his inability to enforce strong leadership opened the door for the growing influence of factions such as the Janissaries and other court factions. Under Selim II, the Ottoman imperial court became more fragmented. The Sultan's authority weakened, and the imperial bureaucracy became rife with corruption and inefficiency. The Ottoman administrative system, once a well-oiled machine under Suleiman, was now hindered by infighting and court politics, destabilizing the empire's governance. One of the most significant contributors to the empire's decline was the growing power of the Janissaries, the elite military force that had once been the backbone of the Ottoman army. Initially, the Janissaries had been fiercely loyal to the Sultan and instrumental in the empire's military campaigns. However, as the centuries passed, the Janissary Corps became a political force with its own agenda and considerable influence within the empire. The Janissaries began to use their military might as leverage in the court, often demanding political influence and interfering in the succession of sultans. This growing political power of the Janissaries led to frequent rebellions and revolts, with the most notable being the Janissary Rebellion of 1622, which culminated in the execution of Sultan Osman II. These internal conflicts were a sign of the deteriorating power of the imperial system. The Janissaries' political role transformed from that of a disciplined military force to an instrument of political instability. Their interference in imperial politics undermined the centralized power that had been the hallmark of Suleiman's reign, further destabilizing the empire's ability to govern efficiently. The Ottoman Empire's administrative system had once been highly efficient, with a sophisticated bureaucracy capable of managing an empire that spanned vast regions. However, over time, corruption and mismanagement seeped into the system. The political elite, including the viziers and provincial governors, became more focused on personal gain rather than the well-being of the empire. Bribery and favoritism became common, and the efficiency of the Ottoman bureaucracy began to erode. Additionally, the centralized authority of the Sultan started to wane, unlike Suleiman, who had maintained a strong grip on governance. His successors were increasingly distant from the day-to-day operations of the empire. This disconnect between the imperial court and the empire's administration led to inefficiency and allowed corruption to take hold at all levels of government. The empire's institutions, once known for their meritocratic structure, began to lose their effectiveness. While the Ottoman Empire had once been at the forefront of military innovation, by the 17th century, it began to fall behind Europe in terms of technological and military advancements. The Ottomans had relied heavily on traditional military strategies, such as siege warfare and cavalry charges, which had been highly effective in previous centuries. However, as Europe began to adopt more advanced firearms, gunpowder artillery, and naval technologies, the Ottomans found themselves increasingly outmatched. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where the Ottoman fleet was decisively defeated by the Holy League, exposed the Ottoman Empire's vulnerability in naval warfare. Despite its size and strength, the Ottoman navy was technologically outdated, unable to compete with the new European naval tactics that utilized superior ships and modern weaponry. The failure to modernize the Ottoman military was a significant factor in the empire's decline. As Europe embraced new technologies and began to build industrialized armies, the Ottomans remained reliant on older methods of warfare, unable to keep up with the changing nature of global conflict. The Ottoman Empire, once united under the strength of Suleiman's rule, now found itself torn apart by internal struggles and external pressures. The weakening of the Sultan's authority and the growing influence of the Janissaries allowed factions to vie for control of the empire. Rebellions in Hungary, Egypt, and other provinces became common as local leaders sought autonomy from the central authority in Istanbul. Externally, the Ottoman Empire was faced with rising challenges from European powers. The Habsburgs in the west, the Mamluks in the south, and the Safavids in the east all posed significant threats to Ottoman dominance. As the Ottomans' military capabilities deteriorated, their ability to manage these challenges weakened, leading to the gradual loss of territory and influence. The period after Suleiman's death marked the beginning of a gradual unraveling of the Ottoman Empire. Weak leadership, corruption, and internal strife compounded the empire's decline. The Ottomans' failure to adapt to technological advancements, the rise of Janissary political influence, and the growing power struggles within the court left the empire vulnerable to both internal and external threats. The once formidable Ottoman military began to lose its edge, and the empire's governing systems became increasingly fragmented. The Ottoman Empire, which had once been the most powerful state in the world, found itself on the decline, with its internal structure weakening as the centuries progressed. The period following Suleiman's reign would set the stage for the eventual collapse of the empire. Yet even in decline, the legacy of Suleiman's magnificent reign would continue to cast a long shadow over the history of the empire. The Janissary Corps, once the proud backbone of the Ottoman Empire's military and the Sultan's most loyal soldiers, would eventually become a symbol of the empire's stagnation and internal decline. What had once been a symbol of elite military prowess and discipline soon became a political force so entrenched in the empire's social fabric that it became impossible for the Ottoman Empire to move forward without first reckoning with the power of the very soldiers who had once elevated it to greatness. The Janissaries' rise is as much a story of the empire's military innovations as it is about political maneuvering. Established by Suleiman the Magnificent during the early Ottoman expansion, the Janissaries were a revolutionary force. Trained from childhood, converted to Islam, and loyal directly to the Sultan, they were the empire's elite soldiers, a model for militarized loyalty and discipline. Suleiman's military victories in Europe and Anatolia were owed in large part to the Janissaries, who gave the Ottoman Empire its supremacy on the battlefield. But as the Ottoman Empire expanded and grew wealthier, the Janissaries' role began to change. No longer solely warriors, the Janissaries began to intertwine with the political and social structures of the empire. Their loyalty, once unquestioned, began to shift. The Janissary Corps increasingly sought privileges, higher pay, and political influence, demanding the right to participate in the imperial court. Over time, the elite soldiers, once disciplined and focused on military strategy, became an influential political force, and that influence would turn the tide of the empire. As the empire faced internal pressure and military stagnation, the Janissaries became a critical political player in Ottoman governance. Their power was not only military, it was political and economic. The Janissaries started to assert their will, not just in military campaigns, but also in court politics. They became influential in choosing the Sultan and shaping the empire's policies. As the Sultan's power began to wane, the Janissary Corps became kingmakers, and their growing political power undermined the Ottoman Sultan's authority. This new political role of the Janissaries was one of the key factors contributing to the empire's decline. The Janissaries' resistance to change was another factor. They were traditionalists, deeply resistant to the modernization that the Ottoman Empire so desperately needed to survive in the face of European military superiority. As Europe advanced with new military technology, such as rifles, gunpowder artillery, and improved naval capabilities, the Janissaries remained reliant on outdated tactics that had won battles in centuries past. Suleiman's army had been revolutionary, but as the centuries passed, the Ottoman military became outdated in comparison to its European counterparts. By the early 19th century, the Ottoman military had become a symbol of stagnation. The Janissaries, once the elite force that had made the Ottoman Empire a powerhouse, now became a hindrance to reform. Their power in the Ottoman court grew to such an extent that they could dictate policy and resist any efforts to change the military structure. This political manipulation and military intransigence contributed to the Ottoman Empire's growing instability, as they became increasingly disconnected from the realities of warfare in the modern world. The tipping point came in 1826 when Sultan Mehmed II, desperate to modernize the Ottoman military, attempted to dismantle the Janissary Corps and replace them with a more modern, professional army. The Janissaries, resistant to this reform, rose in revolt. What followed was the auspicious incident, a brutal confrontation that marked the end of the Janissary Corps as a political and military force. As Sultan Mehmed II's forces surrounded the Janissary barracks in Istanbul, the rebellion quickly escalated into a bloody battle, with thousands of Janissaries killed and many more exiled. The Janissary Corps was effectively disbanded, and the empire's military reform began in earnest. The rebellion, however, was more than just the fall of a military institution. It was a symbol of the Ottoman Empire's internal collapse. The Janissaries, who had once been a symbol of the Ottoman military elite, had now become the embodiment of the empire's inability to adapt to the changing world. Their decline marked the beginning of the end for the Ottoman Empire's dominance. The Janissaries' transformation from loyal soldiers to a corrupt political force illustrates the deep fractures within the Ottoman Empire. Their resistance to modernization was not merely military, it was social. The Janissaries had become integrated into Ottoman society, and their privileged position allowed them to exert influence over local governments, economic systems, and even religious institutions. The once noble institution of the Janissaries had become a symbol of stagnation. Their decline is reflective of the broader Ottoman struggle to modernize and keep pace with European advancements. The Ottoman Empire, once a beacon of innovation, had failed to adapt, and the Janissaries' decline symbolized the broader societal and military shifts that were taking place within the empire. The failure of the Janissaries to adjust to the changing geopolitical landscape marked the beginning of Ottoman fragility. The Janissaries' power had been so vast that their downfall left a power vacuum that would be filled by new military factions and a shift towards centralized control. This shift would ultimately lead to reforms and the Tanzimat era, but by then, the empire's strength had already been compromised. The loss of the Janissaries was a painful but necessary step in the empire's transformation, but it also highlighted the unstable foundations of Ottoman rule. The 19th century marked a pivotal and painful period for the Ottoman Empire, one of gradual decline intertwined with fleeting moments of hope for reform and renewal. The era following Suleiman the Magnificent's reign witnessed an empire that had once dominated much of Europe, Asia, and North Africa now scrambling to hold its vast territories together. Though Ottoman sultans in the early part of the century sought to stem the empire's loss of territory and military strength, the forces of change and decay were already in motion, and the Tanzimat reforms, though ambitious, would struggle to halt the empire's downward spiral. As the Ottoman Empire faced growing challenges from Europe, Sultan Mehmed II, beginning in 1826, launched the Tanzimat reforms in a bid to modernize the empire and restore its former power. The goal was clear: adapt the empire to the new political, social, and military realities that were transforming the world around it. However, these reforms were not simply a matter of technological or political change. They were a battle for the soul of the empire. The military reforms were among the most critical aspects of the Tanzimat. By the time Mehmed took action, the Ottoman military, particularly the Janissary Corps, was outdated and had become increasingly influential in Ottoman politics, hindering any major military transformation. The auspicious incident of 1826, which saw the violent dissolution of the Janissaries, was a moment of dramatic change. Yet, this change opened the door for a new professional army, modelled after European military systems, with European officers brought in to train Ottoman soldiers. Despite these efforts, the Ottomans' military capability could not keep pace with the advancements in European firepower and strategy. On the social front, the Tanzimat sought to unify the Ottoman population under a more centralized and egalitarian system. One of the most significant reforms was the Hatti-Sharif of Gulhan in 1839, which promised equality before the law for all Ottoman subjects, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. This was a profound shift designed to curb the influence of local leaders and regional pashas, who had often enjoyed too much power over their territories. Christians, Jews, and Muslims were promised equal protection under the law, and reforms were made to taxation, military service, and the judiciary. However, These changes were met with resistance from the traditionalists within the Ottoman court and the military, who feared that these European-inspired reforms would undermine the Ottomans' Islamic identity. Religious conservatives saw these moves as a challenge to their authority, while local elites were reluctant to give up their autonomy and privileges. The conservatives' opposition was a constant thorn in the side of Sultan Mehmed II and his successors, leading to a fractured reform process that lacked the cohesion necessary for long-term success. While the Ottoman rulers worked to reform the empire, they were also beset by growing external threats. The Russian Empire, ever expanding in the Black Sea and the Caucasus, had long been a nemesis for the Ottomans. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, which saw the Ottomans allied with Britain and France against Russia, was a clear reflection of the empire's weakening military position. The war, primarily fought over Russian expansionism and control of the Black Sea, exposed the Ottoman military's technological stagnation and inability to compete with Europe's modernized armies. Despite a victory in the war, the Ottomans were left vulnerable and their territories continued to dwindle. The British Empire, eager to maintain control of India, viewed the Ottoman Empire as a strategic ally, but was also seeking to expand its influence in the Middle East. The French, under Napoleon III, sought to assert dominance in North Africa and the Levant. The Ottoman Empire, caught between competing European powers, found itself increasingly unable to defend its vast territories. Russia's expansionism, in particular, continued to chip away at Ottoman control over areas like the Balkans, and Britain and France often played their own games of influence within the empire, further complicating the Ottomans' efforts at reform. Throughout the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire lost much of its once vast territory. The Balkans were the first major region to slip from Ottoman control, as nationalist movements within the Christian populations began to rise. The Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1830, was one of the first signs that the Ottoman hold over its European territories was weakening. The Greeks' successful bid for independence from the Ottoman Empire in the 1830s set a precedent, and soon other groups in the Balkans, such as the Serbs and Bulgarians, began to demand their own independence. Meanwhile, the Ottomans' grip on North Africa began to loosen. Egypt, which had been under Ottoman nominal control, saw Muhammad Ali Pasha break away and establish an independent dynasty. The French conquest of Algeria in 1830 and the eventual Italian conquest of Libya further reduced the empire's influence in North Africa. The Ottomans, though still powerful in the Middle East, began to lose their influence as local governors and tribal leaders sought more autonomy. By the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, with much of its European and North African territories lost. The empire was still an important regional power, but it had become increasingly irrelevant on the world stage. Its inability to adapt to the European military, economic, and political advancements left it vulnerable, and its territorial disintegration became a symbol of its internal decay. Despite the Tanzimat reforms, the Ottoman Empire was never able to overcome the tension between reformers and traditionalists. The military and administrative reforms were essential for the empire's survival, but the resistance from conservatives and local elites weakened the effectiveness of these efforts. Moreover, the reforms were often half-hearted and fragmented, lacking the coherence necessary to fully transform the empire into a modern state. The Young Turks movement in the late 19th century would become the last significant attempt to reform the empire, advocating for a constitutional monarchy and greater political rights. However, by the time the Young Turks gained power in 1908, the empire was already on the verge of collapse. The Ottoman Empire would enter the First World War in 1914, and by 1922, the empire would cease to exist, replaced by the Republic of Turkey. The 19th century was a time of profound struggle and transformation for the Ottoman Empire. The Tanzimat reforms offered a glimmer of hope, but the empire's internal divisions, resistance to modernization, and external threats ultimately sealed its fate. The empire's decline was not merely the result of military defeats or territorial loss, but a more profound issue: the inability to modernize and adapt to the changing world order. Despite the reformist efforts, the Ottoman Empire was unable to overcome the forces of nationalism, imperialism, and internal disintegration that led to its collapse in the early 20th century. The Ottoman legacy, however, continues to resonate in the modern Middle East and Southeastern Europe, as the empire's influence shapes the region's political and cultural identity to this day. The Ottoman Empire, which once commanded vast territories stretching from the Balkans to the Middle East, was now teetering on the brink of collapse by the early 20th century. The Great War, known to history as World War I, would be the final blow to the centuries-old empire. But the story of the Ottoman decline is not just one of military defeat. It is a tale of internal strife, political disarray, nationalism, and an empire that could no longer adapt to the modern world. For all its ambition, the empire, at the turn of the century, was facing the end of an era, and World War I would be the crucible through which the Ottoman state would be dissolved. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire had already lost much of its former glory. The empire had been in decline for centuries, losing territories piece by piece to European colonial powers and nationalist uprisings. The Ottomans had already been forced to cede Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and much of the Balkans, and North Africa had been largely lost to the British and French. The empire was a shadow of its former self, its military technology outdated, its administration increasingly weak, and its political system crumbling under the weight of modernization and reform. In the face of these internal challenges, the Ottoman leadership made a fateful decision to ally with the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, in hopes of reversing the empire's fortunes. They saw an opportunity to regain lost territories, particularly in the Middle East, and to secure Ottoman sovereignty against the growing influence of Europe. Yet, this decision would mark the empire's entry into a war that would end its centuries-old reign. The Ottoman participation in the First World War was marked by a series of disastrous military engagements. The Gallipoli campaign of 1915 to 1916, one of the most defining and heroic events of Ottoman participation in the war, saw Ottoman forces, under the command of Mustafa Kemal, successfully repel the British and French forces attempting to secure the Dardanelles Strait. Despite their success at Gallipoli, however, the Ottomans were fighting a losing battle on multiple fronts. The Arab Revolt, backed by the British under T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, was eroding Ottoman control in the Arabian Peninsula, while the Russians continued their expansion in the Caucasus. On the Eastern Front, the Ottomans were besieged by Russian forces. The empire's failure to effectively defend its northern borders further drained its military resources. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, the Ottomans were pushed back by the British, culminating in the fall of Baghdad in 1917. This was a devastating loss, signaling to the world that the Ottoman Empire was no longer the force it once had been. The Ottoman military's strategic blunders, combined with the internal resistance from its diverse populations, led to the empire's rapid disintegration during and after the war. By the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was left in ruins. The Central Powers had lost the war, and the Ottoman Empire, one of their last remaining allies, was left to face the consequences. The Treaty of Sèvres, 1920, signed by the Allied powers, effectively dismantled the empire and stripped it of nearly all its remaining territories. The treaty imposed harsh terms. The Arab provinces, including Syria, Iraq and Palestine, were placed under British and French mandates. The Balkans had already gained independence, but the Ottomans lost even more territory in Anatolia and the Aegean Islands. Greece was granted territories, and parts of eastern Anatolia were earmarked for an Armenian state. The Treaty of Sèvres also created a Greek presence in Istanbul and offered an international administration for the Dardanelles. Perhaps most humiliatingly, the Ottoman Sultanate had no control over its capital, Istanbul, and was effectively reduced to a puppet regime. The Treaty of Sèvres was a brutal blow to the Ottoman state, marking the official end of its centuries-long reign. The treaty, however, was never fully implemented, as Turkish nationalists under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk resisted the terms. The harsh terms of the treaty were rejected, and the Turkish War of Independence began. The Treaty of Sèvres was the death knell for the Ottoman Empire, but it also sparked the creation of something new. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, a young military officer who had distinguished himself during the Gallipoli campaign, emerged as the leader of the Turkish nationalist movement. Atatürk's vision for a modern, secular, and nationalist Turkey stood in stark contrast to the Ottoman Empire's centuries of imperial and religious rule. In 1919, Atatürk established a Grand National Assembly in Ankara, defying the Ottoman Sultan and the occupying powers. The Turkish War of Independence, 1919-22, was a difficult struggle, but Atatürk's forces were able to repel Greek, French, and British intervention and, in the process, reassert Turkish control over Anatolia. By 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished, and in 1923, the Republic of Turkey was officially proclaimed. Atatürk introduced sweeping reforms, including the establishment of a secular government, the adoption of the Latin alphabet, the creation of modern legal codes, and the integration of women's rights into Turkish society. These reforms were aimed at transforming Turkey into a modern European-style republic, one that would be built on secularism, nationalism, and modernization. Atatürk's vision marked a break from the Ottoman past and laid the foundation for a new Turkish identity, free from the constraints of empire. The Republic of Turkey, founded in 1923, would become a regional power in its own right, focused on internal modernization and a secular, national identity. World War I was the final blow to the Ottoman Empire, but it also catalyzed the rise of modern Turkey. The empire's military defeats, economic collapse, and the harsh terms of the Treaty of Sèvres sealed its fate. But Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's leadership brought forth a new era. The Ottoman Empire might have crumbled, but Turkey's transformation into a secular republic under Atatürk set the stage for a new chapter in the history of the Middle East and Southeastern Europe. Atatürk's reforms represented not just a political revolution, but a cultural one as well, leaving behind the Ottoman system and embracing modernity, secularism, and nationalism. The Ottoman legacy would live on, but it would be forever reshaped by the vision of a new nation, one that would enter the 20th century as a reformed, secular republic, a reflection of both the Ottoman Empire's rise and fall and the revolutionary rise of modern Turkey. The ashes of the Ottoman Empire had barely cooled when a new era dawned over Turkey, an era of sweeping transformation, radical change, and the birth of a nation-state that would define the 20th century. At the helm of this revolution stood Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, a man whose vision and leadership would forever alter the course of Turkey's history. The transition from the crumbling Ottoman system to the modern Republic of Turkey was not merely a shift in political power, it was a profound revolution that reshaped the very fabric of Turkish society, politics, and culture. Atatürk's reforms were bold, ambitious, and, at times, controversial. His vision was crystal clear: to create a secular, modern, democratic state that could stand alongside the powers of Europe and the world, a state rooted in nationalism, progressive thought, and the ideals of modernity, far removed from the centuries-old traditions of the Ottoman Empire. When Mustafa Kemal Atatürk took charge of the newly established Republic of Turkey in 1923, he was not merely a political leader, he was the architect of a revolutionary transformation. He envisioned a secular Turkey, free from the theocratic influences of the Ottoman Caliphate and firmly entrenched in the modern world, embracing Western ideals of democracy, education, and progress. Atatürk's vision was born out of the understanding that in order for Turkey to thrive in the post-imperial world, it needed to break away from its Ottoman past. The empire's downfall was, in part, a result of its failure to adapt to the changing dynamics of European imperialism and modernization. Atatürk, having witnessed the empire's collapse and Turkey's subsequent war of independence, was determined to forge a new path, a path that would make Turkey a self-sufficient and powerful nation, able to compete on the global stage. This vision required sweeping reforms that would span across nearly every facet of Turkish life. The first step was to abolish the Ottoman Sultanate and Caliphate, symbols of the old imperial and religious systems that had governed the Ottoman Empire. With the abolition of the Sultanate in 1922, Atatürk marked the definitive end of the Ottoman imperial era and began the creation of a new republic, one based on national sovereignty rather than monarchical rule. The creation of a secular government was at the heart of Atatürk's reform agenda. Under the Ottomans, religious leaders had held significant sway over the state, and the Islamic faith was intertwined with governance. Atatürk sought to remove religion from the public sphere, firmly establishing secularism as a foundational principle of the new Turkish Republic. This would allow the state to be governed by reason, science, and modern political thought, not by religious dogma. The abolition of the Sultanate in 1922 was one of Atatürk's most significant moves. The sultans had ruled the Ottoman Empire for centuries, but with the fall of the empire, the Sultanate became a symbol of backwardness and tyranny. By abolishing the monarchy, Atatürk sent a clear message to the world. Turkey was no longer an empire, but a modern, democratic nation. Shortly thereafter, in 1924, Atatürk moved to abolish the caliphate, severing the ties between the Ottoman Empire and Islamic religious leadership. This marked the final end of Ottoman rule and ensured that Turkey would no longer be governed by a religious authority. One of Atatürk's most enduring reforms was the adoption of the Latin alphabet in 1928. The change from the traditional Arabic script, which had been used for centuries in the Ottoman Empire, was more than just a linguistic shift. It was a symbol of Turkey's modernization. The Arabic script had been ill-suited for education and mass communication in the rapidly changing world. The adoption of the Latin alphabet opened the door for mass literacy, improved education, and a closer connection to the Western world. Atatürk's emphasis on education and literacy was foundational to his vision of a modern, forward-thinking nation. Another critical aspect of Atatürk's secular vision was the reorganization of the educational system. Under the Ottomans, education was heavily influenced by Islamic religious institutions. But Atatürk sought to secularize education by establishing a new national curriculum that would focus on science, mathematics, history, and literature based on Western models. Religious schools were reformed or closed, and new universities and research institutions were established to promote scientific inquiry and modern thinking. Atatürk understood that the future of Turkey depended on education. He established free public education for all children, regardless of gender or background, aiming to create a well-informed and progressive citizenry. This focus on education became one of his defining policies, as he sought to instill a sense of national unity and modernity in every citizen. In 1923, Atatürk formally established the Republic of Turkey, creating a democratic government that would replace the Ottoman Sultanate. The new republic was built on the principles of nationalism, secularism, and sovereignty. Atatürk's vision of a democratic and republican Turkey was realized with the introduction of a multi-party system. Even though the Republican People's Party, Atatürk's own party, remained dominant in the early years. In 1924, the Constitution of the Republic of Turkey was enacted, and universal suffrage was granted to all Turkish citizens, including women. A radical step in a region where women had been historically excluded from political participation. Atatürk's commitment to democracy was a central tenet of his vision, though the implementation of full democratic processes would evolve over time. The Republic of Turkey was firmly committed to national sovereignty, with the idea that the Turkish people should govern their own state, free from the interference of foreign powers. Atatürk sought to modernize Turkey's legal and political institutions, creating a legal system based on European models and distancing Turkey from the Ottoman Empire's Sharia law. This was part of a larger drive to align Turkey with Western Europe and its values of enlightenment and progress. Atatürk faced enormous challenges in implementing his reforms. The Ottoman Empire's collapse left a country in disarray, with factions within Turkey's population still clinging to old ideas. The abolition of the caliphate was particularly contentious, as many saw it as an attack on Islamic tradition. Religious conservatives, who had been accustomed to the Ottoman system, viewed Atatürk's reforms with suspicion and anger. They believed that secularization and modernization would erode the Islamic identity of the country. Atatürk's political rivals, particularly the religious conservatives and regional leaders, also resisted his reforms. The country's economy had been devastated by war, and nationalistic sentiments ran high, making it difficult to unite all regions under one banner. But Atatürk was determined. He used his military experience and leadership to consolidate power, ensuring that the Republic of Turkey would stand firm against the threats of internal division and external influence. Atatürk also faced opposition from foreign powers, who saw the rise of secular Turkey as a challenge to their interests in the region. Nevertheless, he successfully navigated these challenges and built the foundation for a modernized, independent Turkey. Atatürk's reforms transformed Turkey from an Ottoman relic into a modern republic, one that would eventually become a regional power in the Middle East and southeastern Europe. His reforms set Turkey on a path of secularism, industrialization, and democracy, laying the groundwork for a prosperous modern nation. The Republic of Turkey, founded in 1923, would not have existed without Atatürk's bold vision and transformative leadership. His focus on education, secularism, and national sovereignty became the bedrock of Turkey's political identity. The secularization of religion, the adoption of a Western legal system, and the focus on national unity made Turkey a strong, modern nation-state. Atatürk's legacy continues to influence Turkey's politics and society today, with his vision of a secular, democratic Turkey serving as the foundation of the modern republic. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you found this one captivating, you're in for a treat with the next one. It's just as fascinating, if not more, than you could ever imagine. Don't miss out. Click on the image on your screen now to dive into the next adventure.